Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Thursday edition of the show, previewing your number one ranked Oregon Ducks against number 20 Illinois. First time that I think I could find. It's not the first time ever on CBS, but the first time CBS is coming to Autzen. I couldn't find a time where that's happened before. So that's kind of a cool deal. Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson, Jenny Dell on the call for CBS. I think the last time Oregon football was on CBS was 2007 in the Sun Bowl.
Yeah, that's the game I've seen people mentioning.
Pretty crazy. Also, first time since '95, Oregon has played Illinois. Illinois came to Eugene. That was Mike Bellotti's, I think, his first win as head coach of the Oregon Ducks. They won 34-31. These two teams only played 3 total times in its history, so it's truly one of those like very rare occurrences that we're still going to have to get used to. But nonetheless, 7-0 Oregon Ducks coming back home for a home game, and one in which like this is a game where it matters. It's going to be hard. There will be moments that will be tough for Oregon, but also feels like one where like they're still Jared, 25-point favorites. Like it's expected
21 and a half.
What?
21 and a half last time I checked.
21. So like it's a game where it's a top 25 matchup. Like Illinois is clearly improved. They've got talent. They've got maybe the third best receiver duo in the conference, top 5 for sure. But the expectation is Oregon kind of rolls here.
And we'll see if they're able to do that, right? I mean, the betting line is one thing. I think Oregon this year is like I think after the Purdue cover, they're 2-5 as favorites this year, 2-4, something like that. I saw this. I know they have a losing record against the spread, so we'll see if they're able to do that. The other thing I'm curious on, which I haven't talked about at least with you guys, because I know you did the mailbag on Monday while I was kind of out with a cough, is how do they handle being number one? And I know Dan doesn't care at all. Jared asked him about it, and what did Dan have to say about being number one, Jared?
Who cares, Erik?
There you go. And that's clearly the mantra and kind of how this team is handling it. I think that's the right answer. I don't doubt that that's like genuinely how he feels, because that's pretty clearly been how he feels about this type of thing for a while. But it's another thing to go out there and actually do it, because this is a program that hasn't been number one for 12 years. And this is a group of teenagers and young men who've never been in this position. So while I'm not super worried about them handling, being in, I guess, a prosperous situation, because they've been there all year, right? This has been a team that's been top 10 the whole season, started top 5. But my question is like, does anything change? Do we feel anything different? I don't think we will, but I just thought, we should probably start the show and bringing up the fact that this is a little bit of a different week because of the ranking.
Yeah, 100% a different week because of the ranking. I mean, and the CBS factor too, and that kind of makes it a different week as well. But I mean, when you ask the team about it, it certainly doesn't seem like it's a different week. It's just the front of the plane. It's business as usual. So they're out there to go get a win. Illinois, I think, is a really good opponent. I think they're 6-1 for a reason. I think their offense could provide some difficulties for Oregon going forward in this game on Saturday. But Oregon is still a superior team. I mean, they're the number one team in the country for a reason. They're coming off of, honestly, a really good win against Purdue, just given the circumstances after the Ohio State win in the short week. Dan talked about having an extra day of prep this week, a full 7 days to get started and going after an opponent. I'm not sure if we'll be able to obviously see that on the field as much as maybe a player or a coach will talk about it, but I do expect them to be prepared. That's been one of the things that Dan and his coaching staff have done an excellent job here at Oregon during their tenure, is being prepared every week for each opponent. And the games that they've lost haven't necessarily been to being underprepared. They've lost because of just teams being better than them, frankly. And that's now the opportunity for Oregon, is teams can be prepared to play Oregon, but the Ducks are going to be better than a majority of teams that they play on the schedule, nearly every single team that they play on the schedule until college football playoffs, until Big Ten title game, depending on who they play, until whatever comes after that. So I kind of expect that to be this week as well, just because of how Oregon's been playing, how Illinois does against better teams on their schedule, like Penn State, their only loss this year, and like Michigan, who held them to like just over 250 yards of offense last week at home. So I think it'll be a good game, but I still expect Oregon to come out on top.
We'll see if Ferguson makes his return or not. I don't think it's a.
I don't expect to.
I'd be surprised.
And just to clarify for people in the comments who didn't think we knew, we know he has appendicitis and that we had an appendectomy. So we just didn't, I guess, call it such on our Wednesday show with Jared. But yeah, I don't expect him. Matt, it feels quick to come back, don't you think?
Yeah, and I don't think this is like even if it was like, yeah, he could play if you really need him. I don't feel like this is that game. Like, it's better to give him another week. Maybe he's back next week against Michigan on the road. We'll see if some of these other injured guys, I don't think we're going to see. I think kind of Oregon's at a point now where, like, if you haven't played because of injury, you're probably out for a while. And you probably shouldn't be debating on if they're going to be available or not. But for me, like, the intrigue here starts with, like, do you play to your standard? Because Jared kind of put it out there. Like, if Oregon's better. And if Oregon plays to their peak performance or close to it, it really won't matter, in my opinion, what Illinois does. Like, they will challenge Oregon, but Oregon has better players across the board. And if they play to their standard, then this is a game that just maybe isn't a blowout, but Oregon will win. And I look at, like, I for Jared's, we do a storyline thing. Like, I talked about just, like, there are three simple things of winning on third down, winning the turnover battle, and then explosion plays and making sure that those happen or don't happen, survive and live another day. And it just feels like if you do those three things, and that's like the recipe every coach says every week for a win. But like this week, that feels more important, where it's like, if you just do those three things, life will be pretty good. And if you don't, that opens the door for hope. That opens the door for craziness, for chaos, for a team who's not as talented you to start believing that they could win and have the chance to win.
I think those things you mentioned feel especially applicable in this game because Illinois is very sound and does those things quite well and doesn't beat itself, right? Like, I made the comparison on our show yesterday of, like, it's like an old school Big Ten basketball team Oregon used to play in the NCAA tournament. Where it was like Oregon probably had the better athletes, maybe had a little better, more explosive offense, but they wouldn't turn the ball over. They would maybe try to shorten the game a little bit by, playing to the end of the shot clock. I'm not saying that that's exactly how Illinois will play, but Illinois doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Like, this is a team that we talked about yesterday has won the turnover battle all but 2 weeks. And of course, one of the weeks they lost was Penn State. In their loss, they gave away 2. They didn't take any away, but they've been really good at protecting the football. Altmaier has only thrown 1 interception this season. So I think that's kind of part of why, in my mind, it feels like a blowout feels a little bit hard to expect, because I just don't expect Illinois to just botch this. Now, to you guys' point, if Oregon comes out and just plays its A game and puts out, like, a performance even maybe more clean from execution perspective than Ohio State or Purdue the last couple of weeks, this could get ugly. Like, Oregon certainly has the talent and the speed. Like, I can't stop thinking about Oregon's speed advantage on offense against this Illinois defense, especially in that front seven. Like, I think there's a path to Oregon gashing them at the second level to, there being a lot of explosives. But I also think, like, Illinois is a team that, seemingly has done a pretty decent job of winning situational football. And that's kind of, if this game comes down to, like, hey, who's converting better on third, who's, maximizing red zone possessions, and Oregon's speed doesn't just create a bunch of explosives and don't run away with it. Execution in those downs could become what this comes down to. And I would be a little bit wary, just because Illinois has been pretty good in those areas most of the season.
I don't anticipate this game being a blowout either. I anticipate Illinois giving it their all. Kind of similar to how their loss was to Penn State. I know 21-7 doesn't look great on paper, but I still feel like they gave it their all. They made that a close game for a while. However, I do feel like the underlying kind of peripherals of this becoming a blowout are there, given their performance, giving Illinois' performances against Michigan, against Penn State, and against Kansas earlier in the season. Now, and Kansas is not at the same level of Penn State and Michigan, but that's still one of the better teams that they played this year, as well as like Nebraska, I would say. But you look at the rest: Purdue, Central Michigan, Eastern Illinois. Like those are not good teams. But Penn State and Michigan's defense held Illinois to under 270 yards both times combined. Against Michigan, Altmaier only threw for 80 total yards, 9 for 18 from passing with 1 touchdown. His lone interception came against Penn State. I just think that they might get into a rut in trying to move the ball against Oregon's defense, which obviously is going to favor the Ducks and their ability to go score. Like Eric kind of mentioned, with their speed on the perimeter on offense versus Illinois' defense, like they clearly have an advantage there. I think it just kind of comes down to what it was last week at Purdue, where they were able to contain Ryan Brown and force him into hard throwing situations, 3rd and longs, 3rd and 11, 12s, but they weren't really able to contain the run against Purdue. They were able to get out on the edges and make life difficult for Oregon's linebackers and their outside linebackers as well. I think Oregon will have a harder time, obviously, defending Bryant and Zachary Franklin on the outside than they did against Purdue. So that might alleviate some of those difficulties if you're an Illinois fan and you're listening. But there's a chance that Oregon's pass defense is that good, and then their pass rush specifically, can get home to Altmaier. This is a team, Illinois, that has allowed 20 sacks this season. Like that's a fair amount. That's a lot. They had 6 or 7 sacks allowed against Michigan. They had a bunch of opportunities to go and get after the passer. And both sides of the line have had some problems. I think their center's a good prospect, but Oregon's defensive line, even without Jordan Birch, has still gotten to the quarterback. There's still plenty of tackle for loss opportunities. So I think that could be a real problem for Illinois in this game. And I expect them to try to alleviate some of that with screens and quick hitters and trying to get the ball out of Altmaier's hands as fast as possible, which may work. But if they're in like a 3rd and long situation or a 2nd and long situation and they decide to pass, there's a chance that the pass rush can get home and make this day very difficult for Luke Altmaier and the rest of the Illinois offense.
All right, let's take a quick break and let's dive into our game props and predictions for this weekend. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. It wasn't an overwhelming great day for us last week on our Friday night in Purdue. Updated standings: Eric 39-31 in first place. Jared and I are basically tied. I'm in second at 35-34 and 1 push. Jared is 35-35.
What was the push, Matt? Oh, was that the one where you just bet straight up? What was it?
What was the push? It was like week 2 or week 3 where.
Okay.
I honestly can't remember what it was, but it was.
It's not a big deal. I
think I made a prediction. And it was like over under 24. I'm just going to throw out a stat, like under over 24 yards, and the guy hit exactly 24. So it was like, oh, that's not over or under. And I made a mistake of not doing 24 and a half. But all right, we digress. Jared, I think you went first, correct?
I did, yeah. With the team.
How about you go?
Sure thing. Starting off, over under Oregon total yards of offense, I'm at 450.5 yards. I think that they're going to hit the over here. I think there's a real speed advantage for Oregon in the front 7. And I think that's going to come up and be, frankly, rather difficult for Illinois' linebackers and outside linebackers if Oregon does what it's supposed to, at least in my opinion, and kind of gets them involved in pass coverage. So I think that they'll be able to rack up some quick yards. I think Illinois' cornerbacks could potentially cause some problems on the outside, but I think Oregon's offense should be able to do some really good things on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm also going over on this one. I think that's a number that's pretty attainable for this offense. Now, I'm not of the. We haven't really talked too much about Illinois' defense, but I mean, they've got some players. I think at the front, the front seven, Akis has been arguably the best.
Yeah, Coleman on the other side too.
Yeah, they've got. Yeah, the last couple of weeks they've got some really good players up front, so that could throw that off. Like Oregon's offensive line struggles in this game, and that's the path to it not being over. But I think they can get over 451 yards, I guess, in this game. So I took the over.
Yeah, I took the over. I don't think Illinois is going to have the speed to hang with Tez and Evan Stewart and potentially Trayshawn Holden. Jared asked the question. He's available.
Yep.
Didn't say he's going to play, but he's available to play. I think he will play. But I just think Oregon's speed on the perimeter is going to be something that Illinois hasn't faced all season long, and that will lead to some breakaway plays, which we'll get to 451 yards.
All right. Next up, over under 3.5 different touchdown scores for Oregon. I went over here. I think that they will obviously hit higher than 28 points, which would allow them to get to 4 touchdown scores. Last week they had 4 specifically. They had Jay Harris, they had Jordan James, Tez Johnson, and Noah Whittington on a touchdown reception. I just think that it'll happen. I think the offense has good energy right now. I think that Dylan Gabriel finds multiple players across the field for touchdowns and potential scores. So I'm going to go with the over 3.5 here.
I have 4 total touchdowns for Oregon in this game. I got a couple field goals. We'll get to the score picks in a second. So I'm just going to say that there's a duplicate. So I'll take the under here. But I mean, this is obviously very attainable. Maybe Jordan gets a couple. Maybe Dylan runs one in as well as I don't know. But I just think there's a possibility we see a couple different guys get in the end zone. So I took the under.
I took the under, but I'll be honest, there's not a lot of confidence. It's a great line of 4 or less, essentially 3.5. I'm banking on the fact that Jordan James is maybe going to get a couple touchdowns, or Tez Johnson's going to get 2 scores, or both guys score twice for my score prediction. So I took the under, but there's not a lot of confidence in that happening.
Fair enough. All right. Final team prop bet that I had, over under 160.5 rushing yards allowed by Oregon's defense. I went over here. Oregon's defense against the run hasn't been great the last 2 games. It specifically hadn't been very good against Purdue, allowing 208 yards on the ground, albeit on 40 attempts. So it was a lot of attempts. And Illinois has been kind of good on the ground recently. 187 yards against Michigan, 177 yards against Purdue. They've been kind of finding something there. I went over mostly because I think that Luke Altmaier is going to have a tough day at the office and isn't going to be able to throw the way he normally does against lesser defense. And I think his pass attempts will be down. I think his completions will be down. And I think they're just going to have to lean on running the ball. And while Oregon's run defense might be really good for like the first half per se, I don't know if it'll be great in the second half, because I think Oregon will have a big enough lead.
I think I went under. I think the matchups are kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit more favorable in terms of just the Illinois skill talent. Like I think about Purdue and the way that they had success, and it was a lot of like off tackle with a little bit more explosive athletes. Like Illinois, I know one of them are out, but their primary runners are like these 240, 250 pound backs that like to bang it between the tackles. I happen to think Oregon's pretty good between the tackles, and I don't know if the speed is there to get off tackle quite the same way. And another thing I was thinking about was some of that, not all of it, but a good amount of the Purdue run success was because of missed tackles by Oregon. Oregon had a really bad week finishing tackles, and that's clearly something that was on Dan's mind in terms of an area to work on. And we've seen them this year when there's been like a thing to work on, they've corrected it. So I think there'll be a little bit more sure tackling this week. So I took the under.
I also took the under. I think Illinois' strengths kind of play into Oregon's defensive strengths, even with Jordan Burch. I don't think it's a coincidence that, to Jared's point of the last 2 weeks, Oregon hasn't really defended the run very well, that the last 2 weeks Jordan Burch hasn't been available to play. I think there's a correlation there to a degree. We should also note Caden Fagan, Illinois' starting running back, is out for the season. Hasn't played the last 2 games, and he's a massive dude, like 6'4", 250 pounds. So you're not going to have to deal with that type of a player. Luke Altmaier, though, scrambling ability could change things, and they've played well at times running the football. But I just think Oregon's strengths here will rise up, and this will be a game where they don't hit that number. So I also took the under. All right, offensive individual prop bets, which was mine. Over under 3.5 targets for Oregon wide receiver Trayshawn Holden. I think over. We've seen these moments where, like, externally people are like, oh, what's wrong with player X? And then the very next week it's like he kind of blows up. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of, hey, let's get Trayshawn Holden's confidence up after being air quotes suspended for the Purdue game. And then I think just the fact that all 3 of Oregon's best receivers, Holden, Tez, and Stewart, will open opportunities up for one-on-ones, and Holden seems like a guy that could really dominate that. So I took the over of 3.5.
Go ahead, Jared. You go next. That's fine.
Deal. I took the over as well. I think Oregon missed Trayshawn against Purdue. I think they missed him against Ohio State as well. I think he does a lot of really good things in this offense that maybe don't get the same shine as a Tez or an Evan Stewart. And when he's open, like, Dylan finds him, and he can turn a lot of things, short yardage into a long yardage. He can go out and make a contested catch. So I've got over, especially being targets. I'll always probably go over on a target situation. Receptions could be different, but I'll take the over on targets.
Yeah, I was looking at his targets per game this year. PFF tracks that, and he's had more than this in all but 2 games. And one of those games was the Ohio State game, where obviously he didn't play past the first half. So if he plays, this feels very attainable. And I think we all think he's going to play. And I guess one element here that is on my mind, we talk about the team speed. Holden's really explosive after the catch. And I just wonder if this is a guy they kind of want to put that on display a little bit against the defense, as we talked about with Illinois, maybe is lacking a little bit of that. And it's not entirely in the secondary. I think they've got decent athletes there, but I think this is a case where maybe Holden's speed could be put on display and taken advantage of. So I took the over.
All right. Moving to the next one. Sacks allowed. Oregon's offensive line struggled early on in the season. It goes 7 through the first 2 games, but then they kind of had a rebound, and 3 straight games without any sacks allowed. That fell against Purdue. Purdue is very good at getting to the quarterback. Like we mentioned, Yakis is just tremendous off the edge, outside linebacker for Illinois, Big Ten Player of the Week.
Yep.
But they've got other guys there too that can make some plays. So I felt like 1.5 sacks allowed. Do you basically expect 1 sack or fewer, or do they go multiple? I said under. I think Oregon's offensive line shows up. This will be a game that maybe it's quick passing just to get the ball out quick, which will maybe limit the opportunities there. But I'm taking the under.
Yeah, I took the under too. I just think it's more like a 1 sack kind of day for Oregon. I think their offensive line has been really good over the last couple weeks. I think while Illinois has some real talent along the edges, I think that's actually where the strengths are for Oregon's offensive line and their tackles. And if they had some interior guys next week against Michigan, I think that would actually be a real problem with pressure up the middle. But I have the under here. I've got some good bit of confidence in Oregon's offensive line to show up.
I took the over, and that's not because I think Oregon's offensive line will necessarily struggle in this game, but just because I think Akis is going to be one of the better players Oregon has seen this season. And I don't know if he'll get home twice, but maybe just the cumulative impact of his sort of disruption will create some havoc. So I think they'll get 2. And just from a pure base stats, counting stats perspective, they've had 19 this season and Oregon's had 20. So just to put into context, these are 2 teams that are very good at getting home. And when it's been kind of when it rains, it pours things for Illinois. You look at it, Nebraska, they had 6 sacks last week against Michigan. They had 5. So Oregon's offensive line, I think, as Jared said, much better on the outside probably than either of those teams. But I do think they might get home a couple times, so I took the over.
All right. Next one. I think this is absolutely perfect symmetry here. Dylan Gabriel's averaging 297 throwing. Illinois' defense is averaging, I think, 297 passing yards allowed per game. So does the average hit here 297.5 for Dylan Gabriel? I think yes. Like I said earlier, I think Oregon's got too much speed on the perimeter. I think that's going to be a key focus point for this offense, especially with Trayshawn Holden. Eric's point of he's a dynamic player in open space. You throw in Kenyon Sadiq and his ability to break away from guys too. It could be a game where across the middle, the intermediate passing game is the focus of the game and the quick stuff with the screens. So I'm taking over 297.5.
I'm going under. I just don't think that Oregon's going to need it. I think that their rushing attack is going to be better. I think they're going to have just a more overall their offensive attack is going to be just all around on Saturday. I feel like it's going to be equal between rushing and passing. And while I could certainly see Dylan going over this mark and making that speed count like Matt just talked about, I think it's more of a 275, 285 day for him. And that's fine because I think he'll complete 75 to 80% of his passes and for a couple of touchdowns. But I just don't know if he'll go over 300 basically.
I took the over. As a good line by Matt. This is right on par with what basically we've seen Dylan do all year, as the average suggests. And so it feels like, if he's up for the challenge and the offense is clicking, and we've already talked a lot about the kind of speed advantages with the receivers in this game, why not take the over? So I took the over. But Jared makes a decent point there of maybe this is a game where you don't need it, and maybe he only needs to throw 25 times in this game, and obviously you're probably not averaging more than 12, 13 per completion or whatever. So,
defense props. What thing are you?
That's me. I will continue talking. So my first one was over under 0.5 receiving touchdowns for Pat Bryant. We haven't really mentioned him a lot by name on this podcast. I know we talked about him earlier in the week, but this is a very dynamic, explosive receiver that's been incredibly productive over his career, but especially this year, and especially catching touchdown passes. He has 7 this year, which is second in the Big Ten, tied with Tez Johnson. So I took the over. Basically, the prop is he going to catch a touchdown pass or not? And I think he will.
Yeah, I got the over as well. I think he's a monster. I think he's a really good wide receiver, and he pairs really well with Franklin on the other side of the field. I think Illinois is going to score points. I don't think that they're going to get shut out like Purdue or held to 1 or 2 touchdowns. So I have him scoring at least one of them. And I think statistically, he has almost half of Altmaier's touchdown passes this season. So
yeah, he does.
If anybody's going to score a receiving touchdown, it's probably going to be him.
I took the under. I think Jabbar Muhammad and Nico Reed and Dante Manning are going to have a good game. And I think part of that will be because of the generated pass rush that Oregon will generate. So I just took the under. I don't think he scores a touchdown.
Fair enough. All right. Over under 6.5 tackles for loss for the defense. And that also, I think, a good line here because they average basically exactly this number, or very close to it, 38. Or sorry, they have 40, so it would be closer to 6.5. There's been numerous times this year where they've gone over on this, so I'm going over. Most recently was last week against Purdue. They also hit that against UCLA and Idaho, and were very close against Michigan State and Boise State. So I think there's going to be a fair amount of disruption in this game, so I took the over.
I took the over as well. I'm doing some little mental math right now, but Michigan had 8.5 tackles for loss against Illinois last week. I mean, Abdul Carter for Penn State had 4 on his own right. So I think that there's certainly a lot of possibilities for Oregon to get into the backfield regardless. Eric and I talked about this on the podcast yesterday. The left side of Illinois' offensive line has allowed 25 pressures this season, which may not sound like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a lot of pressures from just one half of your line. The right side of the right guard that position has been going through 2 guys back and forth all season long, so there's not a lot of continuity there. I think there's a really good chance for guys like Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Mateo or Tatum off the edge to really get home and make some plays in the backfield.
Yeah, Jared's right. The left side, led by Josh Gesky, is like he's a stud. J.C. Davis is good, but the right side is a concern. And I just think man-to-man, Oregon's defensive line is better. I think Derek Harmon is making a case for the best defensive lineman in the conference. I think Jamari Caldwell does a lot of things that just doesn't get a ton of credit to open things up for everybody else. And I think this is a game where we could see Oregon's linebackers shoot the gap here a little bit and make some tackles just behind the line of scrimmage. So I also took over 6.5 tackles for loss.
All right, last one on defense here, over under 1.5 turnovers forced. We talked about it the whole week. This is a really, I guess, competent offense for Illinois in terms of protecting the football. 6 giveaways all season in 7 games. Obviously, 2 would be, or 1.5 or more. Assume 2 would be matching a season high, which came against Penn State. Oregon's defense hasn't necessarily produced like a huge number of turnovers this year, but we've seen the last couple of weeks a little bit more opportunistic, or at least around the ball. Purdue, they obviously could have had a 3rd turnover forced if Harmon just kind of pounces on that ball a little quicker. So I think their game, and I don't know, my hunch here is that there maybe Altmaier is kind of forced to make some plays. He hasn't, and he's been so good at protecting it this year. Maybe he kind of falters here. So I did take the over.
I took the under. I just have him in my brain going with 1 turnover, whether that's a fumble or an interception. I think there's a high chance for an interception. I think towards later half of the game that Illinois is going to be down. They're going to be needing to throw the ball a lot more, and that'll produce some opportunities. But I went the under here.
3 of the last 4 games that they have played dating back to last season against ranked opponents, they've committed 2 or more turnovers. I think this is by far the most talented team they will face. I'm not expecting an Autzen Stadium 2.0 like Ohio State, but I do think the atmosphere will be a different one for them, and that will potentially factor in here. So I took the over as well. All right, game picks. I guess I'll go first. I have the widest scoring margin between the 3 of us, but I also don't think Oregon's going to top 40 points. I'm just banking on the fact that Oregon's defense is going to play pretty good football. When Illinois has played ranked opponents or teams the caliber of talent or close to it that Oregon has, they just don't score a lot. And so I'm banking on that. I'm going Oregon 38-14, a game in which it's a 24-point margin, but I don't feel like it's ever going to feel totally out of – it's not going to be a full-on blowout. It will be competitive. Illinois will have their opportunities. It might even be a 1-score game going into halftime. Maybe. I don't know. But I just think Oregon wins this one 38-14. They cover the 21-point spread, but it might be a backdoor cover.
I've had a hard time. I've been pretty confident most weeks of like where I'm going with it. Maybe the Ohio State week being the one that maybe I wasn't. Maybe that one was kind of tough, but this one I've gone back and forth if I think it's a cover or not. I've ultimately landed with not a cover, and in fact, I've got it 34-20 Oregon. I think Illinois, and this has been kind of my through line the whole podcast, so I apologize, but I just think they play very sound football and don't make a lot of mistakes and don't beat themselves. And teams like that just don't get like fully blown out very often. And that's been kind of this team under Brett Bielema most seasons, even if last year when they won like 5 games, if you look at the scores, like not a lot of just like, oh man, they got it put on them. So I think that trend continues. I think Oregon will kind of win this game in kind of a couple key sequences. Like I think they're going to be a little bit more successful in the red zone than Illinois. I think they'll be a team that is a little bit better on 3rd down than Illinois. I was actually looking at Illinois earlier. I think I said that they were pretty solid on 3rd down. I think they're 8th in the Big Ten in 3rd down offense, and Oregon's 3rd in Big Ten in the Big Ten in defense on that down. So maybe that's a down where Oregon's able to get off the field and force some punts, kind of like they did against Purdue last week. But I do think Illinois will be able to move the ball and have some success. So 34-20, I could definitely see it being closer to Matt's score. I don't think this is a game that's ever going to feel like, oh my gosh, this is on the cusp of being an upset necessarily. Maybe it will early, but not in the second half.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure they ever fully separate.
Yeah, I've got Oregon 38-21. I feel the same as Eric. I think that this will just be like a kind of a second half separation for Oregon. I think it'll be kind of close in the first half. I think Illinois can game plan really well and come out of the gates with, scheduled their scheduled first offensive drive and maybe push down the field and look pretty darn good doing it. I think it'll be about in-game adjustments for the most part. And Oregon so far this season has made really good in-game adjustments during halftime or even just on the fly. And like we talked about, Brian and Franklin on the outside for Illinois. I think that's a really tough matchup, but Oregon's secondary has been awesome this season. I don't know if they will do the Ohio State thing and try to limit how downfield they allow Brian and Franklin to go. That might be the way to do it because they're both really good at running 9 routes and just getting downfield and getting past secondary members. But I still think Oregon's defense is going to give Luke Altmaier hell. And I think that Oregon's offense is going to have a pretty good time running the ball and finding people for quick slants and using their speed for their advantage. So I don't think this is going to be a blowout, but I think Oregon's going to win decisively.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Excuse me, here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Next time you hear from us will be guys, celebrate this, a Saturday evening, late evening or early evening recap show. 12:30 kick. Phenomenal stuff here. CBS. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.